In this video, I want to talk to you about manifesting wealth. I want to start off by saying this is not a video that provides the secrets to manifesting great richness. Personally, I'm not really in favor of that kind of presentation. This kind of thing happens in specific areas, like the secrets to losing weight fast, the secrets to attracting, the soulmate of your dreams, the secrets to becoming rich overnight and all that kind of stuff. What I can tell you is that building wealth requires that you understand the way that money flows, the way that the energy flows in harmony with money. When you understand that and you actively apply the principles, then it's pretty much inevitable that you will begin to build wealth. Briefly, just to share a little bit about my own experience in order that I would have some credibility to provide this instruction, is that I struggled for a long time. I struggled into my 30s to have any kind of money at all. And yet I was constantly reading these books, Millionaire Mind, Think and Grow Rich, Power of Positive Thinking, and numerous other books that talked about the principles of manifesting wealth as a spiritual project, as a spiritual goal. And for many years, through most of my 20s and portions of my 30s, I often barely had enough money to make the bills every month. And yet I was trying so hard to apply these principles that I had learned. Shortly after coming onto the spiritual path, which was in 2004, I had my first six-figure year, income-wise. Personally, I don't think it's a coincidence that when I began to turn to God with real fervor, with real commitment, that the doors kind of busted open. Subsequently, I have had several six-figure years as far as the income that I've earned through employment. I've run 3 or 4 businesses. I've never really made a ton of money off businesses. They've all been profitable, but I've been able to survive and I've been able to live a comfortable lifestyle. What I mean is I haven't made millions of dollars. But I realized at some point that that was really not a priority for me. But if you apply the principles that I'm going to teach you here, and you want to make $1 million or several million, then you just sort of have to keep going. Recently, I sold a house that I owned for 8 years, and it was a very profitable transaction for me. So really, for the first time in my life now, I have a certain sum of money which affords me a certain freedom. So hopefully that's enough credibility for you to receive what I'm going to talk about and decide if you want to apply it. I want to talk about the spiritual principles that govern manifestation, because the same basic underlying approach, whether you're trying to attract a partner that you are deeply in love with, whether you're trying to attract an apartment to live in, a new job, just a general source of income, if you want to attract better health, etc., etc., things follow a particular course of events that can be described in 3 words: thought, word, action. Everything begins as a mental concept. Now, through being a priest and a teacher on the path, one comes to realize that people have very little idea of the totality of what they project through their thoughts. In fact, I've had many people come to me for counseling and said, I did everything right, I did all these things, and it didn't work out, therefore it's not fair, or I'm a victim, or I'm going to give up. And I think there's a lack of thoroughness in one's willingness to examine the mental activity that precedes your adventures in life, the things that you want to draw to you. I really want to encourage you to be willing to investigate at a very granular level your mental activity. When it comes to wealth building, this equation, thought, word, action, begins with a vision. It begins with a mental idea of what you want to accomplish. And it's not good enough to say, I want to make $1 million. It's too vague. You have to have, and you have to be able to see in your mind the lifestyle that you want, the money actually existing, whether it's in your bank account, in your wallet, in your credit score, in your portfolio of properties, whatever it is, you have to be able to see it in your mind. You have to be able to see it and actually believe it. It's one thing to see it and sort of go like, yeah, I don't think that's ever going to happen, but okay, whatever. There's a disconnect there. It's not that difficult to sit there and daydream about being rich, but if you don't actually believe it, you don't think it's ever going to happen, you don't see yourself as the kind of person who could achieve that, then we have what's called a house divided. We have some energy going in this direction towards the wealth, and some energy going in to try to maintain congruency of what I really believe, which is that I'm not that kind of person. I'm never going to have that. It's not going to work out for me. Generally, what you deeply believe is going to win out. And I really believe that has to do with the concept of integrity. That we want to be beings of integrity. We want to be integral, meaning whole. So we will tend to support what we really believe so that we can feel relaxed, so that we can feel at peace. It causes turbulence when you believe something and yet you're living something else. And many people would say, well, that's the case. But I actually don't believe it's possible. I think there's a transition period where you're looking to reprogram yourself with new beliefs. And for a period of time, what you say you believe is at odds with what you have believed for a long time. And that creates a certain tension. So we have to sort of cling to our new beliefs, and we have to, in a disciplined way, enforce them, and eventually they supersede the old. Because we begin to have experiences that validate that what we believe is actually true. And I've done work with people who have actively tried to change their beliefs. And there's a whole process that you go to where you first have to examine the old beliefs, investigate where they originated. You have to consciously reject those beliefs as false. And that's difficult because part of us goes, no, that is true. I have gone through that. That is how it works. But a spiritual teacher will say, no, that was true for you because you believed it, because you were treated that way, because you decided that that is how reality is. But I'm telling you that's not how reality is, not unless you want that. It's not that difficult to create that kind of misery if you believe it and you expect it to happen to you. You will tend to orchestrate situations. People go, well, I don't want this thing to happen to me. People say, I don't want these kind of negative things to happen to me. You're wrong if you think that that's what I want. Yeah, consciously, of course, people don't want to live in poverty and don't want to barely subsist. But subconsciously, they may believe that that's actually what is their destiny. And that has a lot to do with how you grew up and what you were taught to believe about yourself. You know, people think, well, rich people, they have it easy. See, rich people, when they grow up rich, they sort of are conditioned to think there's all sorts of abundance, and all you have to do is basically go to the store and buy it. At the same time, they're generally raised in an environment where they see how that wealth is built up and how it's accumulated. They can watch it happen. So they sort of get marinated in this environment, which sets them up then to continue in that path. And the same thing happens in poverty. If you grew up in poverty, you kind of marinate in the energy of that. You see how adults around you act. You see what leads to a lack of income. And really it becomes a training ground for sort of how you're going to live. Unless you make a decision to go like, no, there's no way I'm going to follow in this path. I'm going to do everything in my power to create something different. So that has to do with, your level of determination and your level of faith in yourself as well as in God. But starting at this first principle, your vision has to penetrate into your beliefs, and you have to basically be prepared to reprogram yourself to believe that you could have great wealth and abundance. That's phase one. That's step one. Now, sometimes these books and these lectures and these retreats make it sound like that's pretty much it and everything else just falls into place. And that's where I got hung up for probably 10 years. I put all this energy into training myself and meditating and visualizing and writing it out and just being really, really clear that this was what was going to happen. But I wasn't properly trained or coached in the next steps. So, first of all, I have to program my inner being to believe that this is going to happen. Well, we live in a material world. So, things don't just mysteriously materialize by the power of thought. Granted, that may be possible. I'm not operating at that level. I'm not saying it's impossible. I actually believe it is possible. But for the purpose of this video, let's focus on how you can actually, realistically, where you're at your level of consciousness, at my level of consciousness, how we can manifest wealth. Phase two. Let's talk about the Word. Okay? Now, we know that Jesus said that He is the Word of God. That's one of the titles. He's the Lamb of God. He's the Messiah. He's the Son of Man. He's the Son of God. He's the Word of God. Part of His mission, or an aspect of His mission, was to speak the direct word that God wanted people to hear. And you could think of that as having two functions. One is that it instructs, it teaches, it guides the people. He walked around and he basically was giving sermons for 3 years, teaching people how to live in harmony with God, trying to break apart these concepts that they had of the Mosaic Law, which were outdated, which were not serving people. The truth that he was delivering was about love and forgiveness and peace upon men of goodwill. And all sorts of amazing messages. If you read and you contemplate the Scripture, you'll see that in his sermons he taught the very essence of coming into relationship with God as an inner experience. So that was one aspect. He brought the Word so that we could be liberated. Another aspect, a deeper and more mystical aspect, is that he spoke the Word into the environment of the earth. And as such, the vibration of that word now became a reality. Now that's something that I hope that you can grasp the hugeness of that. Like when you speak the word, you ignite a vibration that begins a creative process. That is a reality. People don't want to take that kind of power, or they don't want to develop that kind of power. The power that what you say is what will occur. Now, if you don't believe what you say is what you will occur, then there won't be any power in your word. But when Jesus spoke the Beatitudes, and when he taught, and he spoke against the Pharisees, and he spoke to the apostles and gave them parables, he was using his word to change the environment of the planet. To go, I have brought a new covenant. This old covenant, the Mosaic Law, served you up to this point. But look around the world. The world is not in a good shape. I'm going to teach you how to come into relationship with the Christ within. There's an expression that the veil is rent. Meaning, and this is what happened in the earthquake, at the moment of his death, or I don't know exactly, it was shortly after his death, the temple fell apart, and apparently the veil or the curtain that separated the people from the Holy of Holies was torn. And that was symbolic of, there is now a pathway for every human soul to access the Christ within. For a long time, it was only the highest of high rabbis who could go behind the curtain and once a year get the guidance from God and then bring it to the people. Now he was going like, everybody has the right to go within and come into that reality, to know that Christ within. So his word not only was teaching the people at the time, But it was like shattering the old covenant and bringing about a new vibration of truth. Now, since Jesus was a human being, we know that what he did, we all can do. That means that your word, if you understand and if you develop the understanding and you commit to speaking at that level of certainty, your word will have that power over your life. So if you proclaim to yourself, I will now manifest great wealth, then it will happen. Your word now supports your thought and your vision. Now, that doesn't mean I'm suggesting you walk into your boss's office and go, I will now have a raise and you will give it to me, because that doesn't work. You know, let's say you're talking to your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your husband and you're saying, I will get a raise this year. Okay, there's power in that word. Or, I've decided I'm going to start a business. And that business is going to be this, and it's going to succeed, and I'm going to, project making this much in the first year and this much in the second year. And you proclaim something is going to happen, and you believe it's going to happen. And just like Jesus now, you create a vibratory field that will begin to manifest. The opportunities and the situations required to manifest that word will begin to appear, which leads to our third step of action. Will you then take the action that's necessary to make your thought, your vision, to complement your word so that what you have said comes into physical manifestation? So that's the spiritual trajectory. Thought, get your vision clear, let it seep all the way down, and be sure that you believe it. You really believe deep within. Second, you begin to speak the word in support of the vision. You don't do it in a boastful way. You don't demand that God give you what you say. But whenever you speak about what you want to happen, you do so with conviction. You pour your heart into what you say. And you know it's going to happen. And eventually you can do it very calmly. You could just say to somebody, yeah, I'm going to be buying a house probably in about 6 weeks. I'm going to fix it up. And I'm going to sell it and make, a decent profit. And when you are so certain of it, people also will go, that's going to happen. Now, you may have people who are jealous or people who are skeptical. People who are very intellectual, and they might go like, well, I don't really think so, or I don't see that happening. But I can tell you that as a priest, when somebody speaks and they believe it and they're relaxed about it, and relaxed doesn't necessarily mean that they're meek, but they may just be very firm and confident. But it's relaxed, meaning they know it's going to happen. They're not somehow speaking in a way that's egocentric and they're sort of asking you to validate it. If I was to say, well, I'm going to buy a house, and I'm going to fix it up, and I'm going to sell it, I'm going to make a ton of money. Okay, that energy is nervous, it's uncertain, it's trying to be confident. And if somebody was in the room with you, they would probably feel pressure to kind of like validate that, because they can see that you're not certain. But if I say, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to fix it up, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to make a profit, it's relaxed. You're not asking anybody in the room to validate your vision. You're saying this is the vision that's going to happen. Okay, now that stage is a little bit challenging, granted. And once again, they don't want to come across as arrogant or boastful or presumptuous. And it's easier to be somewhat meek and sort of like under the guise of humility to act like, well, I want to be modest and stuff. You can be modest at the same time as being confident. So it takes some practice to put your word on something in a way that has power without being offensive to people. The third phase is about action. Now, this is a place where you have to have patience. You really have to have patience when it comes to building wealth, because I have found that with real transformation, real change, things have a gradual trajectory. And man, if not in this country or in lots of parts of the world, somebody wants it and they want it now, and they want it fast. And I get that. It's cool to get things fast, because we're in a certain predicament now and we're sort of suffering in that predicament, and we just want that suffering to end. But that negates that free will, that power and that responsibility that God has given us as a soul to actually learn how to pull ourselves out of difficulty so that we never fall back into it. If I'm a poor guy and I go poof and a bag of money shows up, and all of a sudden I can pay off all my bills and I can go rent a nice place to live and I can buy a car, I haven't learned anything about that wealth. I haven't learned how to value it, the process and the time it takes, meaning how to put my thought on it, how to put my word on it, how to then follow through with action. So how long is it going to be before I run out of money and I'm in the exact same situation? Not that long. So God gives us this environment where we can do things in a sort of a shoddy way, a get quick kind of way, and we don't learn anything. Or we can just commit to the learning process. So we have to then begin by creating a plan of action. We have to begin by assessing our situation and working within the means that we have. We have to learn how to take the proper amount of risk, but not too much risk that puts us at the risk of losing too much. Now, I want to give you some practical tips about this because I've been through it. And it took a long time to get to a place where I can say these kind of things, just because I've actually, pounded my head against the wall for a long time before I began to see things work out. One of the things that's really important is the career that you choose. Now, unfortunately, there are some careers that are incredibly valuable, but the society doesn't value them financially. For example, teachers. Grade school teachers, high school teachers. I'm not sure about university professors. Nurses, for example. Other professions that would probably be more associated with feminine energy. They're not paid a lot of money, which is crazy. Probably in some countries they are. But in the United States, they're not seen at that kind of level the way, money managers are, like financial advisors, doctors, lawyers. Okay. Well, if you have chosen a profession that does not really pay a ton of money in relation to the kind of money that you want to earn, you've got to consider that. I would not recommend that you do everything I'm saying. Program yourself for a vision. Speak the word. And then take a profession that pays $60,000 a year and think that you're going to get rich eventually. Because there's a practical side to this. And you have to honor that. Now, you could be a teacher, and let's say you're making $60,000 a year, and you could become very frugal for 3 or 4 years and put aside, 10 or 12 grand a year, so that you end up with about, $45,000 or $50,000 that you can then use to do something, to make some kind of an investment, to start a business, to get a down payment on a property, or whatever it might be. That's another one of the principles on the practicality side, is that generally you need some capital in order to manifest more capital. So for most people, they have to start off by working, and they have to start off by putting aside some money, and then they have to have some kind of an idea where they're going to risk that money. So of these 3 principles, the first one is be aware of the profession that you've chosen, because society dictates there are certain limitations within, many professions. And if you've chosen a profession that has a certain low income in general, it's going to be harder to manifest the wealth that you want. Not impossible, it just may take longer. Number 2, you need to begin to put aside money so that you have money to do things with. Generally, increasing in your wealth requires the movement of that energy, the movement of that money. And thirdly, is you have to be willing to take risk. You have to be willing to put that money into something That worst case scenario, you lose it. Best case scenario is it doubles, it triples, it quadruples. It leads to greater revenue for you. In order to do those three things, you're going to have to spend some time and figure out, how you emotionally resonate with each one. If, for example, you love teaching and you want to be a teacher, then you go, okay, well, if I'm going to manifest greater wealth, I may have to work for 5 years and live relatively frugally and amass a certain pool of money that I can then either put into a property or start a business on the side or make some investments. If you're somebody who makes $150,000 a year, you can still live relatively frugally and maybe put aside $50,000 in 1 year or $20,000. And after 2 or 3 years, you've got $60,000 or $75,000, or if you're really, diligent and disciplined, you could have $100,000. Okay, you have greater opportunity to move faster because you have, been more diligent in amassing some capital to begin with. When it comes to taking risks, calculated risks. When I was younger, I took a lot of risks because I believed so much in this mental game that I had. But I didn't have the wisdom and the experience to really recognize what I was getting involved with. And so I lost big sums of money at times. And I was, relatively crippled financially. Sometimes that's the only way you learn, because I always hated the idea of somebody telling me, well, you can't do that, that's not going to work out for you, you're not that kind of person. I was like, oh yeah, we'll check it out. Well, sometimes I overstepped what was actually a comfortable level of risk, and I tripped and I fell on my face. So I don't want you to have to do that. I don't think you have to go through that, but a lot of really successful people have reached a place where they get absolutely broke. That probably has a lot to do with their conviction in their ideas and their conviction and their faith in themselves and their confidence, sometimes beyond a normal range. Sometimes that they are so committed and convicted in their idea that they extend beyond what is a good level of risk. And I would say I was somebody like that. I don't do that anymore because I realize that it's hard to build up from zero, So, to wrap this up, let me just recap. Follow the spiritual principle of manifestation. Thought, followed by word, followed by action. Create a vision, and sit with it, and meditate on it, and visualize it, and see to what degree it creates dissonance inside. If you go, I can't believe this, I don't see it happening, then you've got to do some work to uncover where you're blocking it, where your beliefs don't think it's possible. You're going to get all your beliefs lined up in congruence with your vision. Number 2 is you have to begin to use the power of your word. You speak about what's going to happen. You do it in discrete situations. You don't proclaim it to everybody. But as it comes up in conversation, you speak with great certainty and confidence, and therefore you create this vibratory resonance. And you're saying to God, you're saying to the earth, this will happen. You proclaim the truth, that which will occur, just as Jesus did. And Jesus spoke a very powerful truth, the gospel. He spoke the good news. I mean, we're over 2,000 years later, it's still very fresh. Okay, there's a lot of people that, discredit it and they don't believe it, and a lot of people who are teaching it, which I consider a good spirit, and then you have a few people who are actually working hard to figure out what he taught and then teach it to other people. But that new covenant got delivered by the Word, and it exists on the earth now. That's what you have to do. You have to speak your creation into manifestation on the spiritual level. And then the situations, and God will provide to you the opportunities for you to manifest that. Now the manifestation, that's the action phase. That requires diligent attention to all aspects of your vision to make sure that they occur. And you have to be aware of where your money is coming from now, and if there's greater possibility in that field. And if you wake up and go like, wow, like I thought I could make more money as an accountant, I've topped out about 65, 68,000. and that's not really where I want to be. So you got to look at changing careers. Okay, well, you maybe have to spend the 3 or 4 years making that transition. Don't be discouraged by things that appear, more long-term. This is a long-term process. Yeah, sure, if you come up with Uber, it looks like Uber just came out of nowhere and all of a sudden it's in every country, or Airbnb. 2 services which I think are like phenomenal. But, they had to present an idea. That idea had to be developed through technology. They had to amass funding. And people who started those kind of things, they do it, and you don't really realize how long it takes. Somebody has to have a real strong vision, has to be a real good salesman when it comes to, getting investments and all that. If that's your gig, where you're like somebody who's got a tech startup idea, man, more power to you. You can make a ton of money. A lot of those things, even if they're really good, somebody comes up behind you and they get to the idea sooner, or you can't quite get to the point where your burn rate kills you before you actually show a profit. But in any case, if I was going to do something like that, I would still follow the same process: thought, word, and action. So look at your current income level and determine if you can start saving enough to amass a chunk of money that you can use then as your springboard to greater wealth. Number 2, okay, the next step is you have to decide what you're going to do with it. You have to come up with some sort of a plan, whether that's you're going to buy a property and rent it out, you're going to buy a property, fix it up and sell it, you're going to start a business, you're going to do some investing in stock market or mutual funds or somebody else's business or what have you. So you need to find some outlet. And you have to be cautious about taking advice from all sorts of people. I think doing a lot of research and coming up with something that appeals to you personally, that you feel a resonance with, something that would be enjoyable to you. And thirdly is you have to examine and you have to be willing to take risk. You have to be willing to lose your initial chunk of money in order that it might grow. So any business that yields has a certain amount of risk to it. You have to be comfortable with that. Try it out. See what happens.